Forbes loses all credibility after this watch article. Chrono24 lays off a big portion of its staff. And Brad Pitt rocks a brand new, beautiful watch on today's episode. Good morning. Today is Monday, February 6, 2023. With me today, I have David Hatton, or Hattenschwiller, or SwissDave.lb. David is actually one of the challenge winners from our last episode of Gray Market. He got to join the team, and he's doing extremely well. Good morning, Dave. How are you?
Doing very well. Thank you so much for having me on your set. Honestly, I love what you've done with the place. Feels like, I don't know, we're in the big time, right?
You would think a couple of like IKEA plants, and suddenly we're big time.
Well, we already had a lot of these accoutrements from a Rolex's penchant for collecting art, but
I get a lot of comments about where this is from. This is a company called Birdvay. Is that anybody familiar? Like exactly the spelling? I tried to look it up. It's like Birdvay. I'm not really sure, but try to find it out. We'll get the details and I'll mention them in the description of this video.
Honestly, I have really fond memories of looking at this thing when we came in for our Gray Market Challenge Day, because it was sitting downstairs, and a lot of the guys were thinking, we were kind of guessing on how much it cost and over under, and surprisingly, it's a fine art piece. And
I wonder how much it does cost.
I think it was around like the $5,000 range. Whoa. Yeah. So probably want to push it in a little closer to the edge of the desk.
I didn't think it was that much, but I mean, I can see why. A lot of time goes into it. All right, let's get into today's topics now. The first topic that I wanted to talk about, and the reason I introduced it as Forbes loses all credibility after this watch article, is because Forbes put out an article claiming that Philip Plein's watch industry gamble paid off. And again, paid off. And I'm putting in quotation marks, because Philip Plein and watch should not go together.
No.
Do you know who Philip Plein is?
Yeah, of course. Philip Plein is he's kind of like the pariah of the fashion world. Me coming from Gucci and dealing with all of these like Italian luxury brands, Philip Plein was kind of a sore subject, because a lot of our clientele would get drawn to, I guess some of our newer clientele would get drawn to Philip Plein, because he was kind of filling this void or vacuum that was left with Ed Hardy and all these other rhinestone brands that kind of went out of style. So yeah, Philip Plein, I know him, and I think that article is interesting the way that they phrased it. Paid off, because I mean it could be an ad. It could be an ad.
It does seem like it. Does seem like it. The thing was, there wasn't anything that this is sponsored. This is paid for. Now, Philip Plein is not only a sore subject in the fashion world, he's also a sore subject in the watch world. The reason being is because his watches, and I'm going to get into it, but his watches are just replicas. That's really what they are. They're replicas with his brand on it rather than the original brand. Sure, he does a little bit of a twist to make it so it's not exactly like. Now, we will get into detail, discussing why they're replicas. First, I want to go into some of the details from the article. Philip Plein presented his newest line in luxury timepieces during the Paris Fashion Week. He claims that he studied the market, noting that while fashion watches retail from approximately $150 to $350, entry-level Swiss watches, Tag Heuer, for example, started around $1,500. So he is filling the gap. Do you think he's filling any gap?
No, not at all. I was on his website. I looked at some of these pieces, and they're at around $1,000 to $1,500 range, and this goes back to the kind of the controversy with the brick watch. Why do these products exist for who? Whereas you can take that money and you can get a great pre-owned Tag or Omega, even if you want to stretch your budget a bit, and you're able to get a quality watch. Whereas these watches, they'll lose all of their value. Like what Roman said, they're shit watches.
They are shit watches. So the gap that I think he is filling is replicas of actual watches, by Richard Mille, Patek Philippe, and Audemars Piguet. I'm actually going to have Ian pull up pictures of these watches. And I know you can't see them, but you have, actually, here, I'm going to show it to you so that you are familiar with what I'm talking about. I want you to tell me exactly what models, what watches we're looking at here.
Wow. So, okay. So the one on the left is like, wow, that's like a really, really bad interpretation or vision of an RM11 with, I don't know what's going on there.
It's a rainbow dial.
It's a rainbow dial. It really is a hodgepodge of everything that's in French we say mauvais goût, which means bad taste, right? So when this is, when you have the rainbow dial executed on an AP or on a Rolex Daytona, it's done tastefully, because it's even though it's opulent, it's showing restraint. This is just it's really like it was generated by AI.
It's like, let me take the best things about watches today.
Yeah.
So it pulled, okay, rainbow dial is very big right now. Let's pop that in there. A skull, let's do that. Everybody loves skulls. Richard Mile's, hottest brand right now. Let's combine all those things. Tell me about the middle one.
That middle one it looks like they ran out of money for the rest of the screws on that bezel because it's like it's a Royal Oak.
It's a Philipp Plein brick.
Yeah. It's a Philipp Plein brick, but with four screws. I don't really like that. It doesn't. There's something with the symmetry is weird. The bracelet, okay, kind of is staying true to the homage, but from the bracelet onwards, I'm totally lost.
And the one all the way to the right?
One all the way to the right, that's really like between like an Aquanaut and like a Piaget Polo, something very strange, maybe with like an Artisans de Genève, ethos to it, but it's very odd,
It seems like he just ripped off the Aquanaut design.
What's strange is that I wonder where these watches are built. Actually, I wasn't able to find that out because I know Philipp Plein, his company is based in Lugano, right? So a lot of these fashion houses are going to be based in Lugano. So about an hour and a half from Milan, because they have they're relatively close to Milan, the fashion mecca of the world, and they also benefit from low Swiss taxes. So you have Gucci, you have all kinds of Bally, all kinds of different brands that are located there. So I wonder if his watches are made in Switzerland.
I mean, so they do look like they are mechanical. They don't look like they're quartz watches. But, and again, this is personal opinion. If you own a Philipp Plein watch, no disrespect, this is just not our scene as, watch retailers. We're not huge fans of fashion watches, especially when they're replicas of existing ones. If you want to be creative and create, like let's say today, if today you were going to create your own fashion watch, I assume you wouldn't just go, out and rip off an existing look or an existing design. This is what he did.
Yeah, this is definitely a bastardized design. It's not at all coherent, cohesive, and it doesn't stay true to any homage that they're doing. But I have a question for you. Is there any fashion watch that you would maybe like to wear or that you appreciate?
I got to be honest. I wouldn't wear it. That's not my thing. But I do have some respect for the Gucci fashion watches.
Exactly, that's where I was going to say. Because Gucci fashion watches or Gucci timepieces, they're actually their own separate company, but under the umbrella of Kering and Gucci. They're all made in Switzerland in Neuchâtel. And what's interesting, one of the watches that really ticked my boxes was back in the day, they had that digital Gucci watch, the round one.
Yeah.
I thought that was such a novel and unique use because there you're having a digital watch that's quite affordable and accessible, but you're, I guess, elevating the materials, kind of like what they would do with a Timex Mr. G, like the G-Shock Mr. G's.
So have you watched the House of Gucci movie?
I didn't, honestly. I haven't. I worked at Gucci for the longest time. There was always a speculation about this movie, but my attention span for movies isn't where it should be.
I recently listened to a podcast about the entire history of Gucci and how it came up and all that stuff. And one of the best decisions that they made, and again, I can't remember which CEO it was at the time that made this decision, was to stop all licensing, to just limit all licensing. They were, abusing the name, and to bring it all in-house, limit the production to only what they wanted to do. And I believe that this significantly helped the brand, obviously in general, but with the watches as well. The watches that were being produced, in the 80s and maybe 90s, could have been anything. Anybody with a Chinese factory can produce a Gucci watch. Whereas today, like you said, they're a lot higher caliber, watches.
Of course, yes. So when I was back at about the funny thing about the licensing is that they used to license the cars. I think they did it up until recently with Fiat, but there's the coolest Cadillac DeVille Gucci with the Gucci pattern on the Landaulet style roof. That's super cool. But when I was just back in Switzerland, there was I just passed by my old stomping ground, the Gucci store where I used to work for several years, and they released a new watch, and it's kind of like a ultra thin Royal Oak homage, but it's an in-house quartz movement. It's one of their first in-house movements. They used to buy off the rack prior to that, and it's a nice watch. I just wish there was a little bit less of like the GGs. It would be nice if it was a little bit simple. But one of the it looks a lot like the Royal Oak, right? But one of the sales associates that I know, he called it the royal joke.
The royal joke?
He called it the royal joke, yeah.
Wow, that's actually really very good.
Yeah, exactly.
I like it.
It took me by surprise.
Very witty. So, I mean, again, I'm sure you know this. I was actually surprised to hear that Gucci is the #1 selling, brand. More than Louis Vuitton, more than Chanel, more than all these other high fashion, brands. I remember a time when Gucci dipped for a while, and I remember I sold all of my Gucci shoes. I was like, never gonna need these again. And now I'm I'm a big fan of Gucci now.
Yeah. Honestly, the fashion is cyclical, but Gucci, what's astounding is it's managed to remain relevant since I guess their new fashion designer Alessandro Michele came, where they did really outlandish statement pieces like the slippers with fur, and everybody needed to have that. Now Alessandro sadly had to step down because it was a lot more of the same, and I'm really interested to see what they come with in the future, who they assign, and where they're going to take it.
Let's move on to our next topic. Next topic is Chrono24 cuts jobs as pre-owned watch prices fall. Now, just so people understand, these these headlines that news agencies use are very misleading. So the title that I've seen most often is Chrono24 cuts 13% of its workforce. Where you're like, wow, 13% of its workforce. That sounds like could be significant. Just to explain, that's 65 people. Whereas they actually hired 100 people just a few months ago. So I feel like this is more of a filtering situation than it is of market is struggling, let's lay off some people.
Correct.
I could be wrong.
No, correct. I think since it is a tech company per se, it kind of follows the trend of where there are these huge hiring sprees during COVID to really grow, and also to deal with the increased traffic of having so many people at home. And you find Google, you find Alphabet, Facebook, Meta. Everyone is aspiring off a lot of those people. Correct. Because things have kind of, wouldn't say the dust has settled, but a lot of these positions were redundant, right? So what I think is funny though is that you had these trends on TikTok, right, where it would be like a day in the life of a product manager at Alphabet, and they show up to the office, they'd go have a Pokeball or a Chia Bowl, and they'd go to the rooftop, and that's basically putting the nails in your own coffin.
100%. Right? So after actually doing some research, I realized that one of the biggest cuts that they're making is in these, I don't know if I want to use the word made up, but newer positions like chief people officer. What is the job of a chief people officer? It's ultimately to make sure that everybody that works in the company is happy.
Isn't that HR?
Isn't that just hey, I pay you.
Right.
I hope you're happy with the money that I pay you.
Right. I mean, when was that not enough? We don't need. I mean, we're lucky to have a ping pong table, but I'd come to work just as happy if we didn't have a ping pong table.
So, Chrono24 doesn't actually sell watches. They're just a digital marketplace, which means that the rise or fall of watch prices doesn't have much to do with them. Sure, they make a small percentage on transactions that happen through their marketplace, but they are a technology company, like you said, and their workforce is made of technical people. So, like you mentioned, if they overhired and now they're downsizing, it's all only because they were swimming in transaction fees when the market was booming, and now that it's not again, a lot of people say it's dying, it's dead, it's phased down in the pool. It's still way better than it was in 2019, pre-pandemic.
Of course. Yeah, you have to plateau. You can't have this exponential growth that continues until affinity. Eventually things cool down and then they go up. I mean, that's just the way it works. Yeah. But Chrono24 it's an interesting resource to see what's out there. But it's quite frustrating today. Even I called 3 guys on Chrono24. Oh, sorry, we don't have the watch. So it's not an actual representation of the market. And I think them firing X amount of people isn't an actual representation of the environment too. They're very much in their own sphere.
Oh, 100%. So goes into the decline in secondhand prices for the top brands has been linked to rising inflation, slowing economic growth in the U.S. and Europe, and the crash in cryptocurrencies. Sure, that I can agree with. But the one, I don't remember where I saw this, read this, somebody said it to me, a tree only grows so high. Now, there's a reason. A tree, if you think about it, trees can continuously grow forever, but they don't. It's the same thing with markets. The watch market has been booming for the last, let's say almost 3 years. And it can only reach a certain level. It can't sustain the continuous growth. So it's coming back to normal. It's coming back to where it really should be. And I can't say that this crazy growth that we've had is overall beneficial. Sure, yes, we were busy. We were doing a lot more transactions. But for the general sake of the watch market itself, I don't think it was healthy. How, what do you feel about this?
Oh no, of course, because it now that there was a slight downturn and things are plateauing, I wouldn't say buyer confidence is gone, but people are still, they're unsure of where the market's going to go, and that kind of breeds uncertainty for the buyers. People who are either waiting for prices to go down and then missing out on an actual deal, or even so, just people who don't want to take the gamble and risk, because they're not feeling that they're getting something that's worth value, right? But it's always the right time to buy, especially when
I agree, especially when you're buying it for yourself.
For sure, exactly.
Not trying to push anybody to actually buy. But I feel like if you're buying something for yourself, to wait and hope that you might get another 2%, 3%, 5%, 10% off. Like, why? If you want it for yourself, you're not buying it for the investment. Sure, a lot of people were buying it to flip and as an investment. But ultimately, watches are a passion asset. And if you want it, then go out and get it.
Exactly.
But I think that today's pricing is a lot more reasonable, as it should have been. It should never have climbed to the levels that it was at. So today's more reasonable pricing allows people to actually get the watches that they've been wanting for the last 3 years. So the company eliminated 65 jobs as it shifted the focus of its operations in the U.S. to Miami from New York and to Japan from Hong Kong. You just took the two most expensive places in the world and said, oh crap, we're spending way too much money here. Let's move out somewhere where it's more affordable. New York, extremely expensive. To actually have offices and hire people and have people that live in New York as your employees is just unreasonable. Same thing with Hong Kong. Hong Kong, I think, is the most expensive place in the world to live.
It is, yeah. You have in Hong Kong, you have these really tiny micro apartments. I can't imagine what leasing office space would be out there. But especially it's a type of job that can be done remotely. You're essentially your customer support for people buying things. The engineer doesn't have to be.
Tell me about your experience being interviewed by Chrono24.
So Chrono24 actually, after I left Gucci and during COVID, I wanted really to focus all my attention to the gray market. So I actually applied for a, private client advisor position. Yep. So it's essentially, you'd essentially, when you go on Chrono24, you have that little guy that pops up. That would be the person that I would have been. So you essentially guide your clients and try to, source pieces and ensure that the purchasing process goes through smoothly. I actually went through a ton of interviews for their Miami office, I believe, but they were using a co-working space. And ultimately it didn't work out, but I'm so glad it didn't.
Yeah, you ended up in the right place.
Exactly. So I went to Chrono24 to get closer to, the guys on the gray market like you guys, right? And when that didn't work out, they gave me an opportunity to come with you. So it's kind of poetic, right?
I love it. It's meant to be.
Exactly.
Our next topic is Brad Pitt paired one of Vacheron Constantine's coolest watches with a sweater and jeans. He recently posted a picture on Instagram that shows him wearing the striking horological, or one of the more striking horological releases of last year, the Vacheron Constantine Historique 222. We recently actually had one in stock, and I think right before this episode it was sold.
Sold in the day. Everybody was really, really interested in this watch. I had a collector in Miami who was interested in it. Anna sold it to somebody as well. We're able to get other ones if ever. But super interesting watch. Beautiful. So it was released for the 222nd anniversary of Vacheron Constantine. The original 222 came out in 3 colors, colorways. So it was in a stainless, yellow, gold, and in a two-tone variation, released in 1977. But it's a funny piece. The 222 is an interesting piece because you have the Aquanaut and then you have the Nautilus, the two sports watches that were penned by Genta, right? And this is kind of an outlier, right? It's different. It's a different in its aesthetic. The bracelet isn't the same. And I think this watch is going to do a lot of great things in the future because it's essentially limited. So
tell me what's different about it. If you close your eyes and you pictured it, explain to you, a lot of people are listening to this rather than watching it. How does this watch differ from an Overseas, for example, or from a Patek or
yeah, so the 222, right? I think a lot of the styling cues are a lot more pronounced. So on the bezel, right, you'll have influences from the Maltese Falcon, right, which is it's not the Maltese Falcon, the Maltese Cross. Maltese Falcon is a yacht, but Maltese Cross, right, where it kind of gives this brutalist aesthetic, right? The strap or the bracelet is a lot more subdued, right? So you have the center links in the 222 Historique, which are brushed and not polished as you would have on other watches. It's a thinner watch, right? And the bracelet, I think, is just much more comfortable. The fit and finish of this watch is just really, really high. It's you put this in a Nautilus side to side, and the 222 knocks it out of the park. It's also a much more expensive watch, plain Jane 222 over a 5711 stainless steel. They're not really quite there, but market price is different. But
how much do you think the recent inquiries for it are attributable to Brad Pitt?
Actually, that's funny, yeah, because that picture went everywhere of him.
Yeah.
And it's the funny thing about Brad Pitt is whenever you see a picture of him, he looks so different, right? You never know if it's him or not.
Yeah. I wonder if this is like one of his stuntman.
Yeah, right. It could have been his body double or clone or something.
So it's funny because the article goes into the fact that as stylish as the 222 is, some enthusiasts say that it's weird to see a Breitling ambassador wearing a watch from another brand and being so public about it. Ian, if you could throw up the picture, Brad Pitt is typically a Breitling ambassador. Now, on his own personal time, I'm sure he has a pretty significant watch collection.
For sure, rightfully so. I mean, a lot of these brand deals, they're great because they make them relatable to their fans and their core demographic. Not everybody can buy a 222, but Breitlings are
of course
relatively affordable, so everyman can have a Breitling. And I think Brad Pitt is kind of an everyman, right? Yeah. He's an attractive, talented everyman. So
he's the man that every man wishes he could be like.
Exactly, but every man can seem to be a bit Brad Pitt. But I don't think they have like exclusive contracts with them. You'll see like David Beckham, who's a Tudor ambassador, like he'll wear a Patek Philippe every once in a while. I just don't think it would jive if there were similar brands. If he's wearing a Breitling and then wears like a Tag or something, I think that's where the conflict of interest would be. Something in the same price range.
We talked to somebody, a very famous, very wealthy athlete that told us about his significant watch collection, and he said, unfortunately, I can't wear any of these out in public because of my partnership with one particular brand. So it was funny because we're inside, we're talking like, what's the point? Like, where do you wear them? Just around your house? Like, if you like, imagine going to a friend's house and somebody snaps a picture of you and posts it on Instagram. That could ruin your entire relationship with that brand. So really, he just has a great selection of watches that he can't wear anywhere.
I guess, you can collect without wearing them. I mean, a lot of people collect.
It's like collecting cars and not driving them.
Well, yeah, that as well. But I mean, it's not a perpetual contract for the rest of your life. This way you build your collection, and when the contract eventually stops, then, you have watches to lean up on.
That is true. David, tell our viewers and listeners where they can find you, where they can reach you in case they have any questions.
Yeah, so my name is swissdave.lb, previously Deals by Dave. Find me on Instagram. You can find me on my socials. I have a YouTube channel coming up. And find me on Instagram. That's the best way to reach out to me.
Okay, sounds good. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for tuning into this episode. If you like what we're doing here, make sure to let us know by commenting, liking, subscribing, writing a review for the podcast. We want to make sure that we're putting out an episode every single day. And in order to do that, we need to know that you're into this sort of content, and we'll continue doing this. Thank you very much again. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a great rest of your week. Havana.